So now it's my privilege to introduce my good friend and our keynote for today, which is United States Congressman Chip Roy from the great state of Texas. Many of you know Chip from when prior to running for Congress, he worked with us at TPPF and leading our 10th Amendment Center and fighting to bring federalism back to the federal government. Many more of you know Chip from throwing high fastballs and being strong for this nation, whether you've seen him making speeches on the House floor, whether you've seen him on Fox News, but wherever you've seen him, you know that he is fighting for liberty and speaking the truth about what we need to do to fix Washington, D.C. and to save our country. I think most important for me is knowing Chip as a friend, from worshiping with him at our church, seeing the amazing husband and father he is to his son Charlie and daughter Virginia, making all of that work while, again, representing us in the United States Congress. Prior to TPPF, Congressman Roy served as the first Assistant Attorney General of Texas under Ken Paxton. He's had an amazing, distinguished career, and it's a privilege for me to welcome him to the stage. Please help me give a warm welcome to United States Congressman Chip Roy. Welcome back to Texas, Chip.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to be home.
Yeah.
I figure if Ted's not here, I get another hour, right? Is that the deal?
Well, you know, you left. It's always good, I'm sure, to leave the cold of D.C. for the colder of Texas.
There's nothing like sitting in your well pump, you know, trying to change the light to keep it warm so that the pump doesn't freeze when you're in Texas. You're like, come on.
You know, I thought for today's program, I was trying to organize my thoughts, and I could have just said, you know, hey, Chip, what do you think? And then about 30 minutes later, I'd say, okay, in conclusion, thank you for being here today. But there's some specific points that I want to cover, and we're going to have more of a discussion dialogue, have a lot of fun this morning, but really hope for you to update our audience in, you know, the minute-to-minute status of where we are in spending and tax cut fights and what's happening in Congress. It's just hard to keep up these days. But to set the stage, I wanted to ask you to kind of frame it in terms of how we got here, not in the macro sense, but really more specifically, you know, I saw that last week you tweeted that prior to COVID, which is only 5 years ago, you know, the federal government was spending $4.4 trillion, which is a staggering amount of money, and now it's $7 trillion. So, I mean, what's baked in that didn't exist 5 years ago? And, you know, why can't we just go back to that kind of pre-COVID level with the justification of all of that growth being the pandemic that doesn't exist?
So really, 30 minutes? We're gonna.
I have more than one question, but.
Well, first of all, forgive me, my voice is a little worse for the wear, but it's finally getting a little bit better. But I do want to start before we get into the policy stuff. That when you come back to these things, and I used to make fun of Ted when I was his chief of staff because he would always say it's, you know, great to be back in Texas, and he had to give one of his Ted, you know, kind of rousing speeches. But it truly is refreshing to be back in Texas, to be among family and friends, and for me that starts and ends right here at these gatherings at TPPF, and so many supporters, you know, financial supporters and so forth, but more importantly, moral supporters that are supporting me and supporting my family. You know, as Rob pointed out, he's a dear friend. We go to church together. Our kids are in school together. And, you know, he talked about, well, how do you balance all that and be a husband and a father? I can't do this without Kara, you know, doing all that she does to keep our family afloat and keeping, you know, our kids in the right spot. And to bring it back to this, like, I can't do this, we can't do this without all the support that TPPF gets. We can't do what we're doing in D.C. The ledge can't do what it's doing. The governor and all the people here in the Texas legislature without TPPF and without the people that are putting forward the good ideas. So it's critical that you all continue, those of you who are supporting TPPF, whether it's financially or through activism, to continue to do that. and keep your foot on the gas. Like, now's that moment when we have to win the fight. This is the thing. The Lord has given us this opportunity, and he's using President Trump. He's using all of this energy that we have, and there's something afoot. There's something happening. And that actually is my segue into to answer your question, which is the fact that we're at $7 trillion, which is a number nobody here can fathom. It's a number that is stupid to even message because nobody knows what it means. But putting it in the context of $4.5 trillion just 5 years ago does start to raise the alarm bells that should be going off in your head, right? $1 trillion of interest. Well, that doesn't mean anything to you, except I tell you that it's bigger than our national defense budget, right? And if I tell you that interest level was about $400 billion when I went to Congress 6 years ago, and now it's $1 trillion, what if I tell you that if we refinance our debt at historic levels of 5%, instead of the 3.5% that CBO has budgeted, it would cost us another $700 billion a year. Guys, what I'm telling you is we are on a fiscal cliff, and we're staring at the abyss. And that abyss is something that has to get corrected. There is a reason that President Trump and that Elon and that the entire team is in fact focused heavily on the spending and the waste and the fraud and the abuse. There is a reason that Scott Bessent has put in his 333 plan, the last three of that plan, 3% economic growth, how many million barrels? 300 million barrels, whatever the three is, and then 3% deficit to GDP to get it down to 3%. We're at 6.5 or 7% now, deficit to GDP. Why is that important for the Treasury Secretary? Well, all of you businessmen and women know the bond markets are just sitting here like this, and the bond markets are watching what's happening. And if you want your children and your grandchildren to be able to afford a house, to be able to afford a mortgage, if you want capital formation to exist in the United States of America, interest rates have got to get back down, we've got to get inflation under control, and we've got to free up capital. And you're not going to do that if the federal government doesn't tighten its belt and stop spending money we don't have. So, and that's right.
So what does the so-called Inflation Reduction Act have to do in terms of that delta between the 4-something trillion and the 7-something trillion, and where does that factor in?
Well, so again, trying to keep this, not nerding out too much in like budget speak. Like literally I'm on the budget committee and we're in the fight on the budget. So I could sit here and get really granular on the numbers, but that won't do any good. What I would tell you is the Inflation Reduction Act. You all remember that, right? A few years ago. In that are embedded a whole lot of horrific policies, particularly for a lot of the folks in this room who have done so much in advancing oil and gas and the energy freedom that the United States has enjoyed, but particularly Texas has enjoyed. What's embedded in that Inflation Reduction Act are a whole lot of subsidies, and a lot of subsidies that are going to subsidize wind and solar. Most of that money is getting funneled heavily to a lot of Chinese interests, right, in terms of solar panels, in terms of what they've got, in terms of the minerals that are necessary for solar panel development, but also all of the wind development. But that is then redirecting, and basically it's making the market not be efficient, and it's taking the resources away from gas development and from what we can do to export LNG and so forth. And that's hurting both our economy, but more importantly, it's changing the whole landscape of how we do things with the grid, what the legislature is having to deal with in terms of trying to prop up actual reliable energy, something that TPPF has been central at trying to fight for. And so what we're trying to do is peel that back. If you peel it back, you can save about $750 billion over 10 years, about $75 billion a year over 10 years. You can save that money and then use that to apply towards tax relief or deficit reduction. But we believe that that number is low. We believe that Alex Epstein, for example, a good friend of TPPF and a friend of ours, Alex thinks that number should be well over $1 trillion. Goldman Sachs valued it at $1.2 trillion. The point is, that is an enormous amount of money, but it's the policy that's actually the most damaging. Because we want to free up American oil and gas, Texas oil and gas, to create an energy renaissance. The president talked about it in his inaugural speech. He talked about it on the campaign trail. You're not going to be able to grow the American economy fast enough to get us out of the $36 trillion ditch if you don't free up American energy. And you're not going to free up American energy if you're subsidizing the stuff that interferes with freeing up American energy. It's just crazy.
So I had the idea, I was going to try out this morning my Trump impersonation.
I'm going to leave for 5 minutes. I'll be right back.
My wife, Leslie, put her hand on my arm and just said, please don't. But I am going to reference some of the things that President Trump has said, including here recently when he tweeted out, in all caps, one beautiful bill. And we're not going to get in the weeds of all of that, but there has been some debate on some of the mechanics. And so just from a broader level to help our audience understand, one bill versus two, where is that conflict? And where is it between the differences in the House and the Senate where, again, recently President Trump said that he loved the House bill and that that's what he needed. Does it matter, and where is the disagreement within even Congress on this?
Man, talk about something that really could take a while and get in the weeds. I'll try to distill it as simply as I possibly can. Let's start with first principles. Let's start with where I know everybody in this room is. Everybody in this room wants tax rates to be as low as possible, more money in the hands of the American people. We want the tax cuts that were put in place by President Trump in 2017 to be permanent, and we want additional tax relief. Fair statement, right? I think everybody would agree with that. In addition, we want to end the inflation tax, which is the tax that is being created by spending all the money that we don't have. So you have a two-headed monster, right? We want taxes to be down, but we also need spending restraint. All right, I need a little tough love speech here, okay? Republicans have been really good at the former and very bad at the latter. We have had a one-way ratchet for several decades of we're for every tax cut you can possibly be for. And let me be clear for all the people watching at home, I'm for that, however, if you do that without the spending restraint side, you've got a problem. And that problem is where we sit today. And we're in a bit of a trap, a bit of a circle as Republicans, because we all believe appropriately that tax cuts in many ways pay for themselves, or at least pay in part by economic growth, building up revenue. But not all tax cuts are created equal. Not all tax cuts pay for themselves in the same way. So we have to be mindful of what we're doing when we say we're going to make the tax cuts permanent. Well, are we going to reduce spending? So now bring it back to reconciliation. That's what we're dealing with right now, right? Reconciliation is the mechanism that allows us to have tools to do what? Try to balance the budget, try to get to deficit neutrality. It's not designed to drive policy debate, right? But we use it for policy. Democrats famously used it to advance Obamacare. The reason is because you have the mechanism to pass it with 51 votes in the Senate. You can get through the 60-vote filibuster. Are you with me so far? So with that comes, what are we going to do on taxing and spending? So now enter the two-bill approach. And be clear, one bill versus two bill. Why is that a thing? Because back in December, November, a lot of us were talking to the incoming administration, and what were we most concerned about? Getting some resources quickly for the border. Why? Somebody was just asking me about Tom Homan. Tom's a dear friend, awesome dude. He's out there doing the Lord's work, and we're starting to clamp down. The numbers are down to 250 a day, down from a high of 10 or 11,000 a day. That's great. But now we need to remove some folks who came here illegally and who are a danger to our society and undermining our country. And we've got not enough resources and beds to do it. We knew that was coming. And that wall is going to get hit very soon. We're capped out right now. Tom's trying to get what he needs. We knew that was coming. So some of us, and I advocated for a two-bill approach. Let's move a handful of spending cuts, use those to pay for what we need on the border, maybe some defense modernization money for Pete Hegseth to start rebuilding our military away from the woke garbage, and let's do what we need to do, boom, right out of the gate. And then let's take the time it's going to take to do tax policy and spending policy in a second bill. That was moving along, and then there was differences of opinion. Well, at some point it became, well, let's just do them all together in one big bill. Well, I'm fine with that too. I just want to get the border done. I want to make sure Tom has the resources he needs to do the border. So, enter the one bill approach. We passed out of the House a budget last week, and in that budget, I'm not going to get too nerdy here, but you're smart folks, bear with me for a minute. You've got basically in there a $2 trillion requirement that we cut spending. Now let me put that in context. That means $200 billion a year for 10 years in reductions in what we call the mandatory spending, and now put that up against a $7 trillion budget. So you do the math. That's a little over 2%. We're talking like almost 3% at $2 trillion, right? That's what we're asking for. Cut $200 billion a year on a $7 trillion budget. And you put that in there alongside basically making the tax cuts extended for a full 10 years. Extend the tax cuts that we did in 2017 and allow for a few other things like tax on tips and so forth. That was the budget that we put in there. But we tied them together. And we tied them together because what we're trying to tell our Republican colleagues is you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's not saying that it's like a one-for-one pay for. What we're saying is, guys, if you're not going to deliver the spending cuts, we're not going to give you the upward ratchet on the tax cuts. That's how we designed the budget in the House. And we did that with Jody Arrington, our fellow Texan, who is the chairman of the Budget Committee. And it took some like kind of backroom working to come up with a solution that set those two together. In doing that, we got it out of the Budget Committee unanimously with the funding for the border, funding for defense, a $4.5 trillion pop for the tax cut relief to make the president's tax cuts in place for 10 years. But then we put in place $200 billion a year of spending restraint. Now, where would that come from? Repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, repealing the student loan program. That's about $250 billion over 10 years. Total, so $25 billion a year. Undoing the EV mandates, undoing other of the Biden programs, like the IRS agents and so forth. Spending, but it would also require touching Medicaid. That's another conversation we need to have, because you got to reform Medicaid if you want to address mandatory spending. I'll finish this diatribe with 2 points. My colleagues will often tell me when I'm railing on discretionary spending, and by discretionary spending, I mean what we debate every year, defense and the alphabet soup of the agencies, right, our discretionary budget. That's about 28% of the total budget. They say, Chip, mandatory spending is the problem. Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, food stamps, all the things that are on autopilot. I say, you know what, you're right. I think we need to address discretionary, but let's do mandatory. Well, guess what? Right now, we're trying to address mandatory and reconciliation. Medicare and Social Security. Social Security is legally speaking off the table. You can't touch it. Medicare, the president said we don't want to touch Medicare. Medicaid, now people are telling me I can't touch Medicaid. Can you all do the math? Like, when are we going to address the so-called mandatory spending when I'm told that I can't have a fight on discretionary spending? The second thing that I'll always be told is, Chip, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And I'll say, well, I've used that talking point hundreds of times in my political career. I agree with you. So what are we going to do about it? Okay, you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's the explainer of it. This isn't a rah-rah speech, sorry. This is the explainer speech. I'll get to the rah-rah in a minute. But this is the explainer part of what we're dealing with and how we're trying to manage it. Last night, the Senate passed their budget, which was a first of two bill approach. We'll see what happens now in the ping pong and back and forth between the House and the Senate. The House will take up the budget that we put forward, which would be the one bill approach, big, beautiful bill approach. We'll take that up next week. I'm agnostic. I want the border funded. I want defense modernized. I want spending cuts, and I want tax relief. I want all of that, and we should deliver, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, thank you, Chip. Everybody in the room agrees with that as well there. Related topic, but shifting gears just a little bit. Maybe just a good image of the state of affairs in today was the image from last night of the president of Argentina giving a chainsaw to Elon Musk speaking at CPAC. It's kind of mood of the country right now. We've got that sentiment here in Texas, but tell me about this DOGE commission and Elon and everything that's happening there. You know, kind of tongue-in-cheek say, well, we got DOGE, we don't need Congress, right? But that's not true. You know, where do you see where that's at, and what do you and your colleagues need to be doing in complement for that?
Well, look, first of all, let's just take a step back and just relish in the last month, okay? Let's just, yeah. No, I mean this. The last 4 weeks have been nothing short of extraordinary. I was, because the inauguration went the way it went with the weather, a lot of you were in town, and I saw you, but obviously there was only a handful of us that were in the Capitol Dome. And it was an extraordinary event, an extraordinary moment, an extraordinary speech. And they just shot out of the gate like a cannon. I mean, it's nothing short of extraordinary. And you go down the list of things, and frankly, and I want to say how much, because a lot of people in this room have worked with me on a lot of the initiatives that we put forward, and how much success we've had in the executive orders that were built on a lot of the policies that we developed. I just want to be very clear. Take, for example, the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation for cartels. I introduced that bill in February of 2019 after a lot of work with friends in this room and generally, and we've been advancing that for the last 6 years. Well, the president issued that order. Marco Rubio listed the cartels just day before yesterday, and that is a big step forward in recognizing the threat of cartels against our country. The World Health Organization, UNRWA, and what it meant in funneling money to Hamas, the United Nations Human Rights Council. Go down the list of things that the president's just been slashing and issuing executive orders to get us out of, and taking the steps necessary to undo DEI and all of the woke garbage, the transgender garbage. I saw Riley Gaines was here in Austin yesterday, and Riley's a great friend. All of this stuff we've been advancing, that is all built and standing on the shoulders of you in this room, TPPF, conservatives who have been making this an issue, and now the president is in the position to deliver, and he's delivering. And he's doing the same thing with DOGE. DOGE is nothing more than doing what Congress should have been doing for the last 2 frigging decades, right? But there were 2 obstacles to Congress doing that. One is we were outmanned and outgunned. You've got an executive branch that was exploding, right? The federal government and bureaucrats. And I've got like 9 staff in a room, and they're having to, and right now I only have 5 because the administration stole 4 of them. So we're, and my chief of staff, Sabrina's back here somewhere. Give a round of applause, because we have the best staff on Capitol Hill. She's back there. She loves attention. But I say that for a reason. Like it is hard. But the second reason is technology, like finding all the stuff. And so Elon, with the algorithms, is basically going through and exposing that which most of us knew intuitively or were already putting out there, but we didn't have the megaphone to highlight. So take, for example, USAID. Go to my website and go look. 2 years ago, I put out a report listing about 25 pages of stuff that I think was ridiculous that we're funding, and saying, why are we funding this? Russ Vought, now the director of OMB for President Trump, Russ and I were putting out, hey, let's defund tyranny. Let's defund the power of the government being used against the American people. We messaged that for the last 2 years. My legislative director got stolen by Russ. Dang you, Russ. And he's now working for Russ over there. Hal put that list together. He's from the district, he's from New Braunfels. So we put that list out. In that list was USAID funding. 2 years, yeah, that's right. So last year, Eli Crane, if you don't know Eli, he's a sniper, so you should be careful. But Eli is from Arizona, he's awesome. Eli introduced an amendment to cut USAID by 50%. All right, now here's what you need as the wake-up call. 102 Republicans voted for that amendment. 114 Republicans voted against that amendment. Guys, if I produced a list for you, which I have not done because I'm trying to keep unity in our Republican conference. Everybody says unity. Let's all unite. Unite for a purpose, ladies and gentlemen. I can put a list up here on the screen of all the amendments that we put forward to do all the things that you want to do the stuff DOGE is doing, and I'll show you majority votes by House Republicans against the things that you want to do. It's not just USAID. I can go down the list. The kill switch. Where's Terry Hall? Raise your hand. Okay, the kill switch. You know what the kill switch is, right? The mandate that automobile makers have a mechanism to be able to kill the car, a kill switch. We had an amendment to kill the kill switch because it's anti-freedom and it drives up cost. My friend Thomas Massey introduced that amendment. Guess what? It got voted down by an overwhelming majority of the House, and we had 18 Republicans who voted against it. And that killed our ability to get that amendment through the House floor. I can give you example after example. That's what has to change. If you want to take our country back, I tell you one more. So Elon comes in to visit with us in December as a House conference. And Elon's visiting in Vivek, and they're on the stage. And he's going through this laundry list of stuff they were going to do with DOGE, previewing it. And everybody's clapping and seal clapping. All these Republicans going, oh, you're so great, Elon, you're awesome. Well, then one of my colleagues literally went to the mic, and I'm not making this up, and says, we hope you can give us the backbone to cut spending. That is an elected member of Congress. I'm not going to mention his name because unity, but I'm just telling you that's what we're dealing with. So I stood up the mic, and then I irritated my colleagues as I'm wont to do, and I went to the microphone and I said, Elon, your problem isn't what you're going to do. Your problem is right here. It's this group of individuals. We're going to have to provide that backbone, and we're going to have to make it to where Congress will deliver. Because all of this awesome stuff President Trump is doing will be for naught if we don't make it permanent and if Congress doesn't back him up.
I want to make sure we get to the border and to get an update from there. You mentioned the foreign terrorist organization designation. I'll circle back to that in a second, but just real quick, I mean, entries in January are down 2/3 from what they were in January 2024. What can you tell us as to the status right now of our southern border and what more needs to be done?
Well, I mean, first of all, again, talk about organizations and groups that were on the front lines of this and working hard to deal with this issue over the last several years and pushing back on Biden. We knew where the president would be on this, but he's frankly exceeded my expectations, which are already very high. Tom Homan is extraordinary. The people they're putting in DHS, I can tell you, again, they've stolen some of my staff to take them over to DHS. Not that I'm bitter about that, by the way. I don't keep bringing it up for a reason. But what we're seeing is extraordinary in driving the numbers down. The numbers of the last week of getting down to 200 or something apprehensions, those are historically extraordinarily low numbers. Now, we all believe they should be zero, right? We should know who's coming across the border. But getting those down to 200 is historically exceptional. And to do it that quickly in 4 weeks, which is why the president was correct in saying that Biden was all hiding behind all this stuff. Of course you can shut the flow down. And by the way, you can still be the Christian nation that we are and deal with people who truly need help. The baby at your doorstep. You can still do that while securing the border, because the vast majority of the people who are being released into the United States under parole and through these programs were being done so unlawfully, and they were doing it in a way that was encouraging people to flood the zone, most of whom did not have a legitimate claim to asylum or a legitimate claim under our laws. So what this administration has done is just simply recognize that. Stephen Miller has been correct. He was correct 4 years ago. He's correct now. Tom Homan's correct. The president's correct. Things are good, however, we're hitting, as I said earlier, the upper bound of what we can do. Think about how many million people released into the United States. We believe it was something in the order of magnitude of 5 or 6 million released, plus gotaways, plus the people who were, granted asylum. Plus, add up all the totals, and you're in the 10 million range. And those numbers are pretty extraordinary. And the cost, I was on Fox yesterday talking about the cost on our programs, on our social welfare state, right? Milton Friedman famously said in the 70s, I'm all for open borders if you don't have a social welfare state, right? And I think everybody in this room, we got to remember that when you're having these debates. And we've got friends in this room I know who are like, yeah, man, you guys are tightening down on this. What are we going to do about labor? I get it. I understand. But we also need to encourage American labor participation. We need to encourage American citizens to participate in that labor supply. And we can do that if we have the right policies in place, constrain the flow at the border, and now get back to the reconciliation point. We've got to get resources to Homan, and resources to the DHS secretary, and get resources to the team to be able to do their job and be able to remove the people who need to be removed. Last point I'll make, because it matters. I had someone was, a Democrat was railing on us for inviting billionaires to our, inauguration festivities and stuff. Well, I said, well, look, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll just tell you this. I invited one person who was my guest at one of the inaugural balls because we weren't able to do the inauguration, and that was Alexis Nungare. And if you know of Alexis, and you know that she unfortunately lost her beautiful daughter Jocelyn last July at the hands of Tren de Aragua, and you know that beautiful 13-year-old girl was taken from her, and you know what Alexis has been doing in campaigning for Ted Cruz, for President Trump, for me and others, that she's stood up and recognized. She wasn't political. And by the way, she started doing that a month after she lost her daughter. And by the way, she's only 28 years old herself. She chose life. She chose life when she was a 14-year-old and she was pregnant. And she raised that beautiful girl, and we lost her because, and I cannot overstate this, when you're talking to your friends in church and your family members, it's so horrific what you're doing on the border. Let's talk about the horrors of that administration, the Biden administration, releasing these dangerous people onto our streets so that someone like Jocelyn is no longer with us. And there are hundreds of those examples. There's thousands of those examples. What this administration is doing is historic. If you see what's happening on the streets of London, if you see what's happening on the streets of Germany, if you see what's happening on the streets of Paris, we have got to maintain the strength of this country. And let me remind you one other number. 51 million people in the United States are foreign born. That is an historic high. That is higher than at any other point in our history, including the early 1900s when we had a massive migration wave. We have got to reset, recalibrate, freeze the border, do what we need to do to train American workers and reset who we are as Americans if we want to maintain this great republic, and the president is doing that, and it's important.
One of the tools to do that is you mentioned the foreign terrorist organization designation. Chip, what does that do, and what tools did that give us we didn't have before, and how do we use it?
Well, I mean, importantly, I think the most important thing is to strike fear in the hearts of the cartels, because they've been operating with impunity for the better part of 4 years. And if you've got, President Trump wielding the power of a designation that they are terrorist organizations, he now has much more authority as commander-in-chief, and they have certainly a lot more authority in our law enforcement agencies with respect to financial tools and what you can do to stop the flow of dollars that are flowing to the cartels and other things. But importantly, it just sends a message to the cartels that as designated as terrorist organizations, we are serious about stopping them. And I was talking earlier to Chuck and to a few other people in the room, Bernie, wherever he is, about what we need to do to advance a truly strong, we'll call it the Trump doctrine if you want to piggyback off the Monroe doctrine of what we have in 21st century America with the Western Hemisphere. We have got to reassert American strength in the Western Hemisphere, push China out of South America, reestablish our strength with Mexico. You want to reduce the pressure valve on our border? Make Mexico great again. Make Mexico strong and adopt the rule of law again. Make Central America and South America strong beacons of not just democracy and our Republican form of government, but capitalism. Let's make American influence there 10 times stronger than Chinese influence. We have ceded that ground now for too long. The president's assertion of authority at Panama cannot be overstated about how important that is, not just for Panama. The president knows, the president's great strength, and it's not news that I've had a few sparring incidents with President Trump over the years, but we have great respect for each other and have fun doing it. I'm going to be honest with you. And our last conversation was along those lines. I could tell you, I'll tell you a funny story. I think it's okay. We were sitting in the cabinet room in the White House, and we were talking about the budget stuff. And the president assembled a group of us to try to figure out how to get it done. It was small, about 20 of us. And JD sitting across the table from him, the speaker, and a couple of folks there. The president hadn't yet acknowledged or known that I was there. So I'm 3 seats to his left, so he's blocked out. He can't see me, right? He's looking across the table. So he's talking. He goes, we're going to get this done. We got to work together. We're going to get this done. He goes, hey, I was talking to that Chip Roy. Man, what a great guy. He's a good guy, that Chip Roy, right? He's a good guy, right? JD's like, Mr. President, he's right there. And the president goes, oh, well, it's a good thing I said nice things. And I said, yeah, Mr. President, that could have gone south very quickly. And then JD said, yeah, he could have just said, you're a raging a-hole. And then everybody laughed around the table. I said, no, everyone else around the table is saying that, JD, right now. But no, we have a good back and forth. And my point is, the president is extraordinary in his vision about what he's trying to accomplish and look 4 or 5 steps ahead of where everybody else is. The border is something we need to deal with right now. But it's almost, I don't want to call it a shiny object because it's the most important thing we need to do. It's not shiny. We need to do it. But it's this level. You got to look down there. And what do you do there is reset the relationship in the Western Hemisphere so that we have a strong economy in Mexico, assert ourselves so that Mexico can adopt the rule of law again. Now you've got a 200-mile border in southern Mexico instead of a 2,000-mile border that we have to deal with up here. Make Mexico a part of that whole situation. The president gets that. That's the kind of stuff that we need to do.
Thank you for that, Chip. I've got 3 points I want to make sure we get to before we close. The first thing, because I saw you file this legislation this week, just wanted to ask for you to explain the COVID liability vaccine bill, why you filed that, and why you see that's important.
Well, so let me start by saying this. Most of you, if not all of you in this room, know I'm a cancer survivor. I'm a big fan of pharmaceutical companies developing drugs that will save our lives. And I assume most of you in this room agree with that, right? We want good medicines. And in fact, I got in trouble at a hearing in my first term in Congress because I said that. I asked about this because they were giving trouble to pharmaceutical companies about making money. And I said, I hope you're rolling in money for developing the drug that saved my life. I have no problem with that. The problem I have is the liability protections that I think are not appropriate, because, you know, the car maker has to deal with the liability of developing a car that doesn't keep you safe. And I have a problem with the revolving door between the NIH and between all the government entities and the pharmaceutical companies, where it's like corporate cronyism. Like, you want to free that up to be a market and let it work. But guess what? If you develop a drug that causes issues or causes myocarditis or causes some other issues that people are dealing with, then you ought to be liable for that. So I know that the ladies for liberty are all about it. I love it. It's great. They're right there. And but you know what? We wouldn't be having the reforms we're having without your all's voice and your all's effort in trying to push those things. And I was at a rally for Texans for Vaccine Choice the other day. And look, let me also say this. Look, I believe in vaccines. I mean, my dad had polio in 1949. He had bulbar and spinal polio. Those of you old enough to remember that terrible time when we had polio epidemic, you understand why that was terrible. So look, but we should be able to have, to Bobby Kennedy's point, all the information and all of the science backing it, and we shouldn't be afraid of pursuing the truth wherever it may lead. That's what the bill's about. The Libel Act that I introduced is specific to COVID, in saying that they ought to be held accountable for liability for anything that they did or that they knew or should have known with respect to the implications of the COVID vaccine. There are other bills out there that I'm co-sponsors of to pull back on the PrEP Act and these sort of expansive liability protections for pharmaceutical companies broadly. This is a debate we need to have. It is a complex debate, but when you've got a fund that is set up currently that has had 14,000 claims among hundreds of thousands of people who have been hurt, and only 50 have been paid out, that's absurd 5 years into COVID. So we've got to change something, and that's what the Libel Act is designed to do.
Great. Thank you, Chip. Thank you. My final question for you in close is, I remember when you first ran for Congress, you ran for Congress on the slogan of "Make D.C. matter less." And what is your vision in terms of what that long-term victory for conservative looks like?
Well, everything, when you walk into TPPF and all the great work that our, now Ag Secretary did in getting that building built, and everybody in this room that helped fund it, and you look at the historic quotes as Texans, and I am a proud Texan, but I went to the University of Virginia, founded by Jefferson. You go look at our founding principles. That's the answer. The answer are the first principles upon which this nation was founded. Yes, we can grow and develop as a nation, but those principles have stood the test of time. And that devolution of power, both horizontally in separation of powers and vertically from federal to state to local, is the trick. That is the solution. DOGE is evidence that we have been way off the rails for too long. And this goes back to what Reagan observed well before the 1980s. About the size and scope of the government. When you give the government that much power, they're going to use it, and it's not going to go well. And so you want to minimize that power in a central location, devolve it to the states and localities, and then therefore you have more influence with your local state rep, or your local mayor, your local city, and you have less room for corruption. That's not to say local governments aren't corrupt. They are. Probably infinitely more so often than even the feds. But nevertheless, you can go deal with it locally. You can go deal with it at the state. And we can then have the size and scope of government we should have. But here's my, again, sort of, little bit of tough love kind of part of the speech, which is right now, last night we had, I think, 24 Republicans voted for an amendment that would have adopted $1.5 trillion worth of cuts. Rand Paul offered the amendment, and only 24 of the 53 Republicans voted for it. So that tells you something. Now, again, it's part of a package. That doesn't tell you the full number. But importantly, there was an amendment offered by a Republican to, quote, preserve and protect Medicaid. Okay, let's have that debate about how we handle health care. But most people in this room do not believe Medicaid is the optimal way to provide health care to an American. I know Cliff Porter's back here somewhere. And look, health care freedom matters. My office put out a 48-page book called The Case for Healthcare Freedom, where we need to empower doctors and patients, not insurance companies and hospital companies and pharmaceutical companies, We need to do that through expansive health savings accounts. We should transform Medicaid and even think about it in terms of Medicare in transforming how the dollars are spent to empower you. Because right now, you have to call some bureaucrat with some health insurance company to ask them how many doctors you have in a 20-mile radius that are in network, just to be told what your copay is, just to be told how much you're gonna have to pay in terms of your deductible, and you're paying $25,000 a year for the pleasure between your employer and yourself. That's asinine. That's not healthcare freedom. And that's just the private market. That's not Medicaid and Medicare and all of the stuff that we're dealing with, CHIP and all of the programs. So back to your point. Let's see who's willing to put their cards on the table right now. The President of the United States is leading. There's energy. DOJ is identifying fraud. We have a moment with a majority in the House and the Senate, and we have the tools with a majority vote in the Senate right now to transform Medicaid and the policy and the programs that are hindering both our fiscal health and our health care system. Will we do it? To answer your question, we must. If we don't do that now, when are we going to do it? Look, America is only as great as how free we are. In Texas, cut my damn property taxes. I've got to own my house. And like, with all due respect to the leadership of Texas, you're not cutting it enough. Let me be blunt. You're not cutting my property taxes enough. Like, you're slave to the state if you're having to pay taxes well into your years on a property that you own. That's crazy. You're not free if your streets aren't safe in your capital city, right? You're not free if you're not able to get the energy of your choosing because federal bureaucrats are providing subsidies, and then a little tough love again. You've got Texas oil and gas companies saying, oh, there's free subsidies? Maybe we should get in the wind and solar business. Give me the free subsidies. The free subsidies. They're not free, ladies and gentlemen. So we've got to do more here in Texas. We've got to do more in DC. But if you want to live free, you got to be able to take what comes with freedom, right? And that makes it the hard part of living, but it also means the joy of being free and what you can accomplish and achieve. President Trump has opened the door. President Trump is doing things that we never thought anybody would do, at least since 1980, and I think it's beyond that. Although we forget all of this stuff with firing the air traffic controllers and the stuff that Reagan did as well that inflamed the radical left. But look, my closing point is, my kids are 15 and 13. You all have kids and grandkids. We've got to use this moment to preserve and protect this country for them. Because what we saw for those 4 years of sheer pain, that is just a small glimpse of what the radical left will do if they're empowered. And they're gonna grab the reins, and you will see a rash of executive orders that will make the ones President Trump has been doing, you'll make you blush about what they will do. We have to reassert the structure and the powers and the protections of our government and our system of government, devolve that power to government closer to you, and empower you, the people. That's what TPPF is about. That's what our republic is all about, and that's what we need to do.
And Chip, we know you'll be leading the way on that. Thank you for being such a champion of liberty, a friend of TPPF. Thank you for joining us this morning. Congressman Chip Roy, everyone.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, guys.